Round the World Lit Audio. Candide by Voltaire. Episode 4. Chapters 19 to 24. Full narration script. Channel intro. Welcome to Around the World Lit Audio, the greatest novels ever written, from every corner of the world, in English. New chapter every week, free to listen. Chapter recap. In Episode 3, Candide fled into the South American interior with Cacambo. He found the Jesuit settlement and discovered Cunigonde's brother, alive, a Jesuit commandant, who refused to let them marry on grounds of birth. Candide hit him with a sword. They narrowly escaped being eaten by the Oreillons. Then they found El Dorado, the real city of gold, where the streets were paved with precious stones, where there were no priests and no courts and no poverty, where the people were genuinely content. Candide walked through it for a month. Then he said he wanted to leave. He wanted Cunegonde. He was constitutionally unsuited for paradise. Episode 4. Chapters 19 through 24. Chapter 19. What happened to them in Surinam, and how Candide made the acquaintance of Martin. The first thing that happened in Surinam was the slave. They were traveling through a plantation when they encountered a man lying on the ground, missing a leg and a hand. He was wearing only half a pair of trousers. He explained, with the flat calm of someone describing a situation they have been in for some time, and have run out of the energy to find extraordinary, that the mill had taken his hand when he caught it in the machinery, and his leg had been cut off as punishment for trying to run away. He said, "This is the price at which you eat sugar in Europe." Candide looked at him. He said, to Cacambo, "I think I am going to have to give up optimism." Cacambo asked what optimism was. Candide said, "It is the mania of maintaining that everything is well when everything is going badly." He wept. He was weeping more than he used to. This was progress of a kind, the specific progress of a person who is beginning to respond to the world as it actually is rather than as the theory said it should be. In Surinam, Candide made arrangements. He sent Cacambo ahead with money to find Cunegonde, who was, it turned out, in Constantinople, having traveled there through a sequence of events that need not be detailed here, but that were consistent with the general trajectory of events in this novel. Cacambo was to go to Constantinople, find Cunegonde, purchase her freedom, and bring her to Venice, where Candide would meet them. He was robbed. Not dramatically, simply and efficiently, in the specific way that money disappears when you have a great deal of it and are not paying close enough attention. A merchant in Surinam, who had been engaged to take Candide to Europe, absconded with most of what remained of the El Dorado wealth. The courts of Surinam, when consulted, sided with the merchant. Candide was left considerably less wealthy than he had been. He needed a companion for the voyage to Europe. He advertised. He interviewed candidates. He found a man named Martin. Martin was a scholar, learned, experienced, and thoroughly, comprehensively pessimistic. He had been robbed by his wife, beaten by his son, abandoned by his daughter, and had watched his country torn apart by war. He had come to the conclusion, through long experience rather than abstract philosophy, that human nature was irredeemably wicked and that things would not improve because the capacity for improvement was not in human beings. He and Candide made an excellent pair. Where Pangloss had maintained, against all evidence, that everything was for the best, Martin maintained, with slightly more justification, that everything was as bad as it could be. Neither position was entirely accurate. Neither man was entirely wrong. They sailed to Europe arguing. Chapter 20. What happened to Candide and Martin at sea? The voyage was eventful. They watched a naval battle in which two ships engaged and one sank. Among the wreckage floating past, Candide spotted something red, a sheep, covered in what appeared to be red wool, floating on the surface. It was not a sheep. It was one of his El Dorado sheep, carrying its panniers of gold and jewels, surviving while everything else sank. Of the 102 El Dorado sheep Candide had left with, this was the one that had not died, or been stolen. One sheep out of 102. Candide said, "You see, sometimes things do work out." Martin said, "I am glad your sheep is alive. I am sure it will die before we reach port." They argued about the nature of the universe. Martin said, "Look at the world. Consider the wars, the famines, the injustices, the suffering. Consider that most people who are not in agony are in boredom, and that boredom is itself a kind of agony. Consider that the evil done in any given week exceeds all the good done in a year. What does this suggest about the arrangement of things?" Candide said, "But there is beauty, there is friendship, there is love." Martin said, "Yes, these exist, and they are surrounded on all sides by their opposites, which are considerably more common." They did not resolve this argument. They did not reach an agreement. They arrived in France still disagreeing, which was perhaps the most honest outcome available. Chapter 21. Candide and Martin approached the coast of France, and what they reasoned. France appeared. Martin said, "I have been to France. I do not recommend it with enthusiasm." He described Paris, the particular quality of Parisian society as he had encountered it, the literary figures and the philosophers and the theater critics, and the various categories of person who exist in a capital city for the specific purpose of being brilliant at dinner and insufferable everywhere else. Candide listened. He had not been to Paris. He was willing to be surprised by it. Martin said, "You will not be surprised by it. It will be exactly what I describe. The vanity will be elaborate. The philosophy will be fashionable. The gambling will be systematic. The love affairs will be transactional. And everybody will have an opinion about everything and be wrong about most of it with great confidence." Candide said, "And is there no good in Paris?" Martin said, "I am sure there is. I have not personally encountered much of it." They talked about free will and the problem of evil and whether the universe was arranged by a benevolent deity, a malevolent deity, or no deity at all, and whether it mattered. Neither of them knew. This was, if nothing else, an improvement on certainty. Chapter 22. What happened to Candide and Martin in France? Paris was as Martin described. Candide fell ill. He was attended by doctors, of whom there were many, all of whom disagreed about what was wrong with him, and all of whom charged significant fees for their disagreement. He recovered, not because of the doctors, but in spite of them, which Voltaire notes is the usual situation. He attended the theater. He met an abbé from Pangloss, who attached himself to Candide with the specific efficiency of someone who has identified a wealthy provincial and intends to extract maximum benefit from the association. The abbé introduced him to a card game in which Candide lost money with the focused inevitability of a man who does not know the rules and is playing against people who do. He was introduced to the Marchioness of Prolognac. The Marchioness was a woman of society, intelligence, and completely flexible morality, and she spoke to Candide about literature and philosophy and current events, with the confident expertise of someone who has read several summaries of books she has not read, and found this sufficient. She said various things about various authors that were wrong with great assurance. Candide found this characteristic of Paris generally. He met a man who had known Pangloss. Pangloss was alive. The hanging at the Auto da Fe had not killed him, had come close but had not completed the process, and he had been recovered and sold as a medical specimen, and had found his way, through circumstances, to a position as a ship's physician, and then as something else, and was now alive and somewhere in the world. Candide said, "Pangloss is alive." Martin said, "I am surprised he is not dead, but I expect he will be eventually." Candide left Paris considerably less wealthy than he had arrived. This was becoming a pattern. Chapter 23. Candide and Martin touch on the English coast. They passed England. Martin said, "England is a country where the people are reasonably free but profoundly melancholy, and where they occasionally shoot an admiral to encourage the others." Candide asked whether this was really done. Martin said, "Yes. The admiral had not killed enough people, so they killed him." Candide said, "That seems excessive." Martin said, "In England, as everywhere, it is better to be the one doing the killing than the one being killed." This is not a moral observation. It is an observation about how things are arranged. They did not stop in England. They continued to Venice. Chapter 24. Paquette and Brother Giroflee. Venice was beautiful. This was undeniable. Venice was one of those cities whose beauty operates as a kind of argument, as though the city itself is presenting evidence for the proposition that human beings are capable of extraordinary things. Candide looked at it and felt the specific pleasure of beauty, which is one of the things that Martin's pessimism could not entirely account for. Cacambo was not there. Cunegonde was not there. Candide waited. He said to Martin, "I believe they will come. Cacambo is reliable. He will have found Cunegonde and they will be on their way." Martin said, "I believe you believe this. Whether it is true is a different question." Candide waited. He encountered, in a gondola on the canals, a woman he recognized, Paquette, the chambermaid from the castle of the Baron, the woman who had given Pangloss his syphilis, and who had last been seen in Westphalia, when everything was still theoretical. She was accompanied by a monk named Brother Giroflee. They appeared happy. This was suspicious. Candide pointed this out to Martin. Here were two people who appeared happy. Did this not constitute evidence against Martin's position? Martin said, "Appear." He arranged to speak to them privately. He was right. Paquette's life had been a sequence of miseries only partially concealed by her professional smile. Brother Giroflee hated the monastery and his vows and his superior and wanted to leave and could not. They had appeared happy because appearing happy is part of what they did. Candide gave them money. Martin said, "The money will not help. She will spend it foolishly, and he will spend it on something worse." Candide said, "Perhaps." But giving it seemed like the right thing to do regardless. Martin said nothing to this. This was, in its small way, progress. Cacambo arrived. He said, "Cunegonde is in Constantinople. She is washing dishes. She has become ugly." Candide said, ugly or beautiful, I love her. It is my duty to marry her. Martin said, duty is a good reason to do something when love has worn out. Is love sufficient when duty is not needed? Candide did not answer this. He was already thinking about Constantinople. Chapter Transition. You have reached the end of episode 4 of Candide by Voltaire. Chapters 19 through 24. Martin has been acquired. Paris has been navigated. Venice has been visited. Cacambo has arrived with news that Cunegonde is in Constantinople and has become ugly. Candide is going to marry her anyway. In the final episode, everything converges. Pangloss returns. The Baron's son returns. Cunegonde is found. And then Voltaire delivers his conclusion, the most famous last line in French literature, and possibly the most useful piece of advice in all of world literature. We must cultivate our garden. Episode 5 is available next week. Subscribe to Around the World Lit Audio so you never miss a chapter. A new episode arrives every week.